Hello viewers, this is the fourth apple and I'm Akmal Makhdoom once again discussing a topical issue, and that issue is Quran burning. The episodes of Quran burning are on the rise in Europe. Thank God, and we thank the Almighty, and we thank Britain that Britain has not allowed it and would not allow and not countenance such negative, psychopathic, sociopathic behavior, such destructive behavior, such insulting behavior in Britain. Because I believe that Britain is a far more sensible, wise and sensitive society. Despite its extremes, the large majority, the overwhelming majority lies in the middle, where they believe in equity, fair play, justice, humanity and compassion. And as they used to say, the Christian values. Now, with the advent and emergence of Islam, which was introduced in Britain by local British people, local English people who were the founders of Islam or creators of Islam, Islamic movement, Islamic knowledge in England, making the first mosque, making the translations of the Quran read universally, Pickthall and others. So I believe that Britain is a safe haven for Muslims, whether they are British African Muslims, British Asian Muslims, British Chinese Muslims, British European Muslims, British Arab Muslims, or British, English, Scottish and Welsh Muslims, as there are many. But in Europe, despite the fact that Europe now has a large population of Muslims, certain European societies and certain European political spaces have allowed unfettered Islamophobic, anti-Muslim, racist activity. And that activity is not only to hurt that local populace of Muslims in that country, whether it be Sweden or in Denmark. They have also sought to and chosen to create grief and unhappiness within Muslims all across. But here, people give an analogy that they would never do that if a European Christian or an atheist, an extremist, racist, psychopathic political thought, if they chose to burn the Bible, or if they chose to burn the Torah, or if they chose to burn the Vedas, or Ramayana, or Mahabharata, but they have given this allowance to the racists and the Islamophobes to burn the Quran. People say, and they give these equivalences and examples, that they would not allow anything to be said about the Holocaust, something which denies the Holocaust, something that minimizes the Holocaust. And in many European countries, there is an automatic imprisonment for people who say things like that. But not in the case of Muslims, not in the case of desecration of Islam or Islamic personalities or Islamic holy books. Now, I have an idea that if we give the example, we should also learn from the example. How have the Jewish population in Europe and Jewish population in Britain dealt with the anti-Semitic and anti-Jewish or anti-Holocaust or minimization of Holocaust behavior of certain extremists? How have they dealt with it? Now that's a very good example. If we can give the example of the unwillingness of the political forces in Europe to allow anything against the Jews and the Holocaust, if we say that, look at these guys, they are allowing the burning of Quran, they are allowing the cartoons of the Holy Prophet, peace be upon him, and his progeny, but they are not allowing, and they have instantly criminalized anything which is anti-Semitic and goes against the reality of the Holocaust. Now, if we say that, if we give these examples, why don't we follow the example of the Jewish population in Europe and in Britain, how to deal with it? Aren't they a very good example or a good role models for us? I think that is the case. What have the Jewish population of Europe, who has been at the receiving end, from many centuries in Europe of discrimination, mass murder, ultimately leading to Holocaust, and expulsion of Jews from Europe. I think that they have dealt with it not militarily, not through violence, but through very concerted, unified social, political, informational, educational, and financial confrontation. What Jews have done, that they have created zero social space for such people. They have created massive political dynamism against such people who are anti-Semitic and anti-Holocaust. They have created and mobilized their economic power, and that is not insignificant, to counter the anti-Semitic and the anti-Holocaust agenda. They have used education of communities, but they've done it in a methodical, intellectual, considered, non-emotional, and non-violent manner. And I think that is the most effective way. There is a massive political clout that the Muslims of Europe and Muslims of Britain can exercise. There is massive social clout that Muslims in Europe and Muslims in Britain can exercise. There is massive financial clout that Muslims have in Europe and in England. And massive educational potential that the Muslims have. So I think that we should look at how our Jewish cousins have dealt with anti-Semitism in the rest of the world. I think we should look at our cousins, how they have dealt with the anti-Holocaust movement, how ADL, APAC, and other organizations have dealt with these issues. And for us, we do not need to reinvent the wheel. All we need to do is get the manual of how they have done it and how we should adapt. And My feeling is that if Muslims adapt these steps exactly, we can also enlist the support of other believing and monotheistic communities as well. We can enlist the support of our Jewish cousins. We can enlist the support of our devout Christian populations, whether they are local or whether they are second or first generation migrants from Africa, from Arabia, from wherever, from Latin America. And we can also generate camaraderie and enlist the support of our Hindu and Sikh and other faiths who are the minority faiths, because the Islamophobia is a replacement of anti-Semitism. So in the 20s, 30s, or throughout European history, anti-Semitism was the main driving force of extreme politics. And that culminated ultimately when the European politics or a part of it decided that they wanted to just create a final solution. And now what's happened is that because it has been so effectively and so brilliantly addressed and countered by our Jewish cousins, this venom, this antipathy has now been replaced with Islam. So anti-Semitism has been moved and Islamophobia has come in. When Islamophobia moves, it may go on to the Sikh religion or the Hindu religion or the Buddhist religion, because that is what is the nature of the beast. The beast of racism, the beast of discrimination, the beast of targeting the minority vulnerable populations has always done it. Whether it is the Black American in the United States, whether it is the American Asian, whether it is the Hispanic in the Americas or in America, or whether there are the indigenous in Australia, or whether they are the indigenous in Latin America. The relationship and the dynamic has always been that there is always a racist, discriminatory, sociopathic part of body politic which then attacks and makes that minority the scapegoat. For a very, very long time, the real target, the actual target of that minority, sociopathic minority, racist minority has been the Jews. And now they are focusing on Muslims. But we know that. And our Jewish cousins know that. And our Christian cousins know that. And all our Hindu neighbors know that. And our Sikh neighbors know that. That the relationship is not antipathy towards Islam. These are interchangeable hatreds that the extreme will pick and choose depending on what is expedient and convenient to them. So what I would suggest here is that we should, and the beauty of Islam is that every Muslim is a part of that large body of Islam. And if one part is in pain, the whole body experiences the pain, as we saw in Bosnia, as we saw elsewhere. So what I would suggest to my Muslim brothers and sisters in Europe and in England is that there needs to be a modeling, a remodeling, following of the manual of how our Jewish cousins have dealt with anti-Semitism, we should then use those manuals, use those areas, the politics, the education, social space, and finances. And when the larger body of Islam is then enlisted, when the Arab money is enlisted in terms of boycotting those forces, their economy, their economic sources, who is funding such organizations? Who is behind, which companies are behind, which banks are behind funding of such people? Then that is something that we should think about and look at. So what I would say is this is not for our generation at this moment, because we are the retired ones, the tired ones, and the old ones. If we have served our communities all our lives, whether it's the NHS or social services or whatever, and we have done it, between 80 and 100 hours a week we worked, and we were on call at times when the whole hours were 120 hours a week. I remember once as a junior doctor. But it is up to the younger generation, the ones who really belong. We were the first generation migrants, but the second generation and the third generation, they are actually the indigenous generations. Because not too long ago, those who call themselves indigenous came from Holland and from Sweden and from Iceland, from other places, and obviously the Norman French. So I would say that basically when you're here, when this is your country, and when Europe is your country, I would say that act in a manner which is effective. In France, the murder of that young boy who was brutally murdered, but then the chaos and the violence that ensued afterwards, maybe that wasn't a very long-term, politically savvy or well-considered reaction. Maybe wiser heads should have prevailed. Maybe all the energy that went into burning of cars and burning of buildings and all the violence and aggression, maybe all that energy and anger could have been channelized in the political sphere, in political mobilization, in financial mobilization. Maybe all the French Muslims and all the devout French Christians and all the French Jews could have decided that they wanted to unite and have a very strong political, social, and economic statement as a sustained, systematic process that would have dealt with it. So these are the thoughts for today's Fourth Apple. So this is Akmal Makhdoom saying goodbye.